Welcome, lovely one, to the Meant for More podcast. My name's Lisa Clifford, and I am building the world's most empowering Meant for More movement, leading millions of heart-led purpose seekers from feeling insignificant to invincible. So I truly hope you enjoy this next episode. And we have Daksha Patel next. Daksha's purpose in life is to empower individuals to live life on their terms, to live a whole and full, fulfilling life where they are living and coming from a place of love and not fear. Daksha, so I would love to ask you my favourite question for this Meant for More podcast, which is, can you share a part of your journey or a story, an experience that you've had where you had that stirring, that ache, or maybe even that baseball bat around the back of the head? Because sometimes, when we ignore the ache or the stirring, we get a bigger awakening, don't we? Where you knew you just felt you were meant for more.
Yeah, it's interesting because in my childhood, I think deep down, I always knew I was meant for more, but I'm not sure I would have used those words. And it's interesting because how do you know that you're meant for more? Maybe because I got into a lot of trouble. I never did as I was told to do. And I guess, that saying, people say you're the black sheep of the family. I guess I did grow up being the black sheep of the family. And I probably was rebellious, although not rebellious in the way that a lot of people might think, oh, she's really rebellious. Like rebellious in the sense of like the most rebellious thing what I did that I got pulled up for was wearing two different styles of socks. It's intriguing, isn't it? That I think growing up, maybe those were all little signs that I was meant for more. And, there wasn't like one moment in time where I thought, right, this is it, I'm meant for more. But there probably was a deep stirring from probably my teens when I really wanted to be this assertive person because I never felt like I could share my voice. I could never talk about my opinions, my views, even say, this is what I want. And so there was a part of me that kept thinking, maybe I need to learn this. And so, I remember going into the library to read books on confidence and assertiveness. And so maybe there was something there. And then went away to university. And then when I started my career, my working career, I was very fortunate because I had a mentor for 2 years. And then because I was on a graduate training scheme, I was able to go on lots of leadership and management courses. And I remember, I don't know exactly, there wasn't like a moment in time, but I remember that there came a point where I used to sit in the classroom, in the workshop, and I was the trainee, and remember thinking, I want to be that person stood in front of all these people, imparting wisdom and teaching and training and doing all of those things. And it was quite interesting because at that point in my career, I was still this really shy, not so confident individual. And if I had to speak in a group setting, like I could feel myself getting really anxious and nervous. And it was like, I'm not really sure I'm going to get from where I am to where I actually want to be. And I think that really did then sort of spark something inside of me. And I think just my upbringing, my sort of teenage experiences probably was kind of leading to this path where I always felt like, I'll probably do something in the space of personal development or personal growth. But I wasn't sure at the time what that was going to be.
Because back then it didn't look like it does today, did it?
No. Honestly, like, when you think about the distance traveled and what you've come through, it's a great reminder, isn't it? Like, wow, I never thought that I would be doing this back then. Just couldn't see it.
I was speaking with Darren Stevens, who's on another episode, and he was talking about connecting the dots. When you look back at your life, and I kind of want to ask you this question, because I think that's quite a headline that you've given us, and underneath it is some gems, I'm sure. I really relate to that bit about seeing the speaker at the front thinking that should be me, but actually, I don't know why I'm thinking this now. I mean, I can't stand up in front of 10 people and speak. But going back and joining the dots, and we get to be in this amazing position that we're in now, which has been of an older age. When I say older, we're older than our 30s and our 20s and our teens. Can you look back over your life and see if it wasn't for that, that wouldn't have happened. If it wasn't for that, that wouldn't have led me to there. And so, what do you think the first kind of the route that initiated this series of dots was?
I think that point was when, when I said to you, I went to the library and I was picking out these books on assertiveness and confidence. And I remember picking up this book by Sigmund Freud, and I had no idea. I remember the author, no idea what the title was. And I remember I must have been in my early teens, because when I opened it, I couldn't even say half the words because they were just so big. And they were totally, it was like, it was a very weighty book at the time. And it's like, there's, it was just like, it kind of felt like I really was kind of punching above my weight kind of thing. It was like, it was just.
You were drawn to it.
I was drawn to it, absolutely. And I think because deep down, I was searching for some answers to questions. And, they weren't going to be questions that I was going to find maybe speaking to, speaking to family. That was just like a no.
What I want to know is, can you remember the question you were searching, or the realm of questions? Was it as simple as, how do I become more assertive?
No,
Yeah, were you
no.
conscious that you wanted to be assertive even? So can you remember what the question was?
Do you know, that is a really good question, because I don't think there was a question, but it was more of a feeling. It was like I knew I didn't feel like I was living my life. And you're right, at that point in time, I probably didn't have the knowledge. I wouldn't have said things like, oh, I'm not very confident, or I want to feel more self-assured. I don't think that those were the words that were in my language at the time. It was probably more like, why does my life feel so shitty?
Because
Truth be known,
you had a
that's what it was.
you had your culture will have been different from people you're growing up with.
Yeah.
What were some of the key differences? And then for you to be rebelling, which I always wonder, and I don't have children,
No, I don't.
so I could be I've got dogs, um, who were always testing boundaries, but I'm just wondering if you rebelling a bit was you trying on identities and
Yes.
working out who you are in this structured culture.
Yeah. And it was a very structured family unit, because I had three brothers. And so I always felt that weight of unfairness, because the three brothers got to do whatever they wanted. And when I asked if I could do the same thing, the answer was always no. And so that this whole kind of gender inequality was very obvious. And it was like, well, I don't understand why. How come they can go out and play with the friends and I can't? How come, it was okay to go out and do things like within the community, but if it was like, oh, I'm going to go to the disco because the school's hosting a disco, that was a kind of a complete no. And I think it was just this, part of it was culture, part of it was religion, part of it was the fact that my parents came from India, and they were scared. They were worried that I was now going to go down this slippery slope of being outcast from the community because I did something that was really wrong, or I got into trouble, or it was like my reputation was going to be smudged in some way or smeared in some way because I was seen with a boy or something. And I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Bend It Like Beckham, and she's laughing with her friend at the bus stop, and then somebody sees them and they've made this judgment call and they think that they're actually in a relationship and that she's gay. It's just like that. It's like they just really, my parents just didn't want me to be in situations where I was tempted or I kind of went off the rails, or I did something that
Well, there
somebody
was
saw
the
me.
perception of it by the sounds of things.
Yeah,
And
there was a huge.
perception and reputation seems so important in some cultures.
Yeah, and it was like perception. It was like also about, their own values, about, what, and their understanding of, what does a successful female Asian woman look like? What does she do? What's her career? And it was always that they wanted to. I get it now, but I didn't get it then. And I understand now that, they did all these things because they wanted to keep you safe, they wanted to protect you. But it became pretty obvious, I think, that I kind of wanted different things in life to what they wanted for me. And that was really where a lot of that tension occurred. And I guess that's probably why I kept thinking to myself, everybody else is kind of living their life to the full. They're not having to ask their parents if they can go out with their friends and socialize. They were all like little things that, in the big scheme of things, I never felt like it was a big ask. And yet it was for them, because they saw me doing something that was not within their control, or stepping into the unknown and not really knowing, what I was up to or what I was doing. And I think I get it now that they were protecting me. But at the time, it was like, no, this is just, my life's a mess. I don't like my life. I felt like a victim of life, wasn't living my life. And that
So
became
were they
apparent.
the first generation that had moved from India? You can completely understand with our adult eyes how the UK, England, where did you move to? Which part of
So
the
they
country?
came to the Midlands.
The Midlands. Oh,
Yeah,
that's right. I remember.
yeah,
And you can completely understand that they're in this other culture and a world of uncertainty, unfamiliarity.
yeah,
And you can completely understand why they, first timers, if you like, in bringing up a girl in another country would be extra. Oh my goodness. I mean, the boys would have been fine. They would have been extra, extra, more than they would have been if you'd have been brought up in India.
exactly.
And so, but you must have had some spirit that just kept wanting to flex your wings of being your true self, whatever that was, but trying on all these different, well, by testing those boundaries, being a bit of a rebel.
Yeah, and it's like those boundaries were sort of being tested. Like, even when I remember when I was doing my O levels, and I was very good at art, and one year I got Artist of the Year prize. So this was when I'd done my O level, and then I decided that I really wanted to do A level art. In my head, like, my career was, I was going to be this fashion designer, all of these things. So my mum sewed, and she taught me how to sew, and I used
Oh,
to make a
brilliant.
lot of my own clothes. And so I thought, well, you know what, I'm good at art and I can make clothes, maybe fashion designer, that's my career. And they just said, no, you're not doing A-level art. We want you to do a science subject, because if you do a science subject like your brothers, then that whole kind of conversation about you can be a doctor or a dentist or whatever, because that's what you do, because those were seen as the successful careers. And I think it just started then, really, and I was like, I didn't do art, and I did do the science subjects, didn't do very well, surprise, surprise. But it started then. It was like I wanted to do one thing, and they were like, nope, you can't do that. And a lot of it was this real tension between complying and deep down feeling like, what's the point here? Because I'm not living my life. I might as well just carry on doing what you're asking me to do. So there was always this deep feeling of not feeling in control and not having a voice. Because even when you expressed what you wanted to do, it was like, no, you're not doing that. You're doing this. So there was
Did
always
you
that tension.
go to school with other girls whose families had just come over? You were born here, weren't you?
I was born here, and we went to, the schools that we went to, there were lots of other families there. There was this sort of a boundary between, okay, you go to school and you come back, and you don't, I didn't go out and socialize with my school friends. I never had school friends come over to mine, or I never went to them. It was like there was this very tight boundary. You go to school, you come back, and then whatever you do in terms of socializing is done within the community.
Yeah.
You're always surrounded by so from my parents, it was like, well, it's okay, because we know Daksha's gone to this other family who's another Indian family, and we know them, and that's okay. Do you see what I mean?
Yes,
Said,
absolutely.
And going now over to, my friend who's white, that would have been like a no-no, because
Because
that
they've been completely out of their understanding.
totally, totally. And yet, my three brothers, they could do whatever they wanted. They could go out at night and they could meet up with friends, and it was just like, why?
Yeah, yeah. I can see why your purpose is to empower people to live their true lives on their terms, since you've had to do so much adjusting to find what yours is. What career did you go into?
So the interesting thing was when I left university, I'd done a degree in economics, and then I still had no idea what I wanted to do. And it's interesting because I think at the time I was thinking, oh, maybe I could work for the World Health Organization or something like that. And then I did another year, I studied for another year, and I did my diploma in personnel management, which it used to be called personnel management
I
then. And
remember.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I did that. And then I think that's what really got me into I wanted to go into HR. I remember I wanted to go into HR, and I really enjoyed that whole looking at sort of the transformational side of HR. And, there was also then the transactional side of HR. And I was like, that's kind of like really, I was really drawn to it. But then I kind of found myself in this kind of vicious cycle where I'd be applying for jobs in HR, but they'd say you haven't got the experience, couldn't get the experience, and therefore couldn't get the job. And then
Well, let me just interrupt because you've just said two key terms there that I'm sure people listening might know what it is, but it'd be better if they didn't. What's transactional and what's transformational
So
HR?
the transformational HR would be more around, your developing your management skills, your leadership skills. It's all about, how you conduct yourself, all of those things as a person, as a manager, as a leader. The transactional side of it is more kind of the day-to-day policies and procedures.
Contracts, yeah.
Contracts, if you're taking somebody through a grievance or a disciplinary. So that's kind of like the day-to-day things that you're dealing with. And then the transformational side of things is more kind of the training, the development, the leadership, the management, the growth side of things. So there's two sides to it, really. So that was something that I was really interested in. And I spent ages trying to get a job, and then I couldn't in HR. And then eventually this opportunity came up to be a graduate trainee with the NHS, and it was in management. And I thought, well, not quite HR, but you know what? It's still sort of something that I could be interested in. And I got myself a place on this 2-year NHS management training program. And that's really kind of where my career started in the NHS. And so I always worked in management. I'm not a therapist or a clinician, but always kind of worked in management and kind of moved up the career ladder, managing teams and sort of straddling where you kind of deal with the operational side, but kind of have to also manage upwards in terms of the strategic side of things. And that was really the start of my career. And I guess that's when it all started around, you know what, maybe that's what I'm really interested in doing, is delivering some of the leadership and management training and the courses that I had access to.
I think you say you didn't have a meant for more moment, but you're not doing HR now, are you?
Well, no, I'm not doing HR,
You have your
funnily
own
enough.
business, which is Mind at Work.
So my business is called Your Mind at Work. And when I was still in the NHS, I did qualify as a coach because, again, I had access to coaching myself. And it was I found it such an amazing experience. And I thought, wow, to be able to hold that space for somebody else in a very safe way, and then to ask questions where they're sort of just digging deep and coming up with these answers. So I qualified as a coach, and again, it's like probably one of those little stepping stones to kind of thinking about, oh, well, I think I could really do this. And then the opportunity arose to take up a leadership and management trainer role for a consultancy. And by this time, I'd already been working in the NHS for about 14 years. And it's quite interesting because my parents were still had this hold on me, like even though I'd left home and, I'm an adult, but they still had this hold on me. And it was like, I know that if I tell them, they're going to say to me, oh, but you're leaving a secure job, and what about your pension? And, this job means that you'll be traveling and you're never going to be at home. And I could just hear them in my head. Nonetheless, I thought, no, this is something that I've been wanting to do, and I'm going to grab the bull by the horns and I'm going to take this opportunity to do that. And it's such a steep learning curve when you go from public sector to private sector. Just everything was so different. Like everything was really different. And it wasn't long after I was in this role, they asked me to do this piece of work, which I had never done before. But, you think to yourself, I should be able to do this, because I've worked in management. I should be able to do this. I can cope. And you don't tell anybody that you're kind of like absolutely dreading it. And you're thinking, I don't want anybody to think lesser of me, or don't want them to think that I'm incapable. I'm not capable. And I remember doing this piece of work and handing it in, and I'd struggled with it a huge amount. Like I'd sweated over it, like for a good 6 weeks. I, sweated tears. I stressed, sleepless nights, all of it. And then I handed it in, and I was quite naive, and I was thinking it's fine because they'll say it needs tweaking here, blah 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 blah. And actually, I got a phone call, and the person who I'd sent it to, they literally said to me on the phone, "It's just not good enough." And I literally fainted on the spot.
You fainted?
I fainted on the spot. I know. And it's interesting because obviously there'd been this huge build-up, and I was in complete denial of the amount of stress that I was probably experiencing. And when I look back, I know that I was experiencing a lot of stress and worry and anxiety. And I think it just built up and built up and built up. But literally on the spot, I fainted.
It's interesting because I've got a friend who owns her own HR consultancy company. She has a big team that works for her. And we were talking the other day about people feeling they can ask questions. And the reason why they don't ask questions, and it's exactly as you've just said, is people feel I should know how to do this. I'm going to say yes, and I will worry about it privately, because if I ask questions, it might look like I don't know what I'm doing. It might bring into question my whole role. It just kind of, we don't want the spotlight on us. And so we don't ask clarity questions or questions of understanding the brief better, or where to navigate information from, or who you can collaborate with to get the project done really brilliantly. We just think, we blame ourselves first. And then we carry this, by the sounds of what you're saying as well, this enormous amount of stress and pressure of thinking that what you should know what it looks like for it to be successful. And you have to do all that heavy lifting yourself. And it's actually in the workplace. I think I know lots of leaders that welcome, please ask me any questions. Ask me anything. I'll happily share with you how much I know. And so if you want clarity, or if you want direction, ask. Because bosses don't mind. Now, I don't know. There's companies and organizations go through waves of expectation and stress. So I don't know that this is the same for every organization. But certainly the companies I've coached, the leadership team, are ask me anything you need from me so you can do that job brilliantly. And they invite daft questions, so that, because they want that project to shine.
The thing about that moment in my life was that I felt like I was playing catch up anyway in terms of my own self-confidence. So absolutely agree. Like now, I would never have a problem about asking any kind of question, like no matter how stupid it was, I would ask it, right? Because now I know that that's okay. But
Yes.
back then, I never had that awareness. I never had that understanding. And when I look back, I have to take responsibility for what happened. I do believe that you should never tell somebody over the phone that the work's not good.
Exactly. There's some nuggets. But what I'm saying, Daksha, is that part of your experience is so relevant to people today, that have that, I should know all of this. And I'm
Yes.
hoping that your story liberates them from that constraint of not asking questions.
Yeah.
That the you today knows, of course I can ask
Yeah.
questions.
And I think that's the thing, isn't it? Because we were talking about perception and we were saying, because like my perception was, if I ask questions, I'm going to sound not intelligent. I'm going to not sound clever. I'm not going to sound worthy. I was having imposter syndrome anyway, but I've never worked in the consultant role. And like I said to you, everything was so different. The culture, the way you do things, I'd never had any kind of exposure to that way of working, because when you're working in the NHS, it's just so different. The language is different, everything is so different. And I think at the time that was my perception, and a lot of it was to do with my own self-confidence and not being able to ask those questions. And it landed me not in hot water, but that's what it culminated in. It culminated in me sort of fainting. And it was really interesting because again, there was that voice in my head about like my parents weren't happy about me moving. I remember, because what happened was when I fainted, my head hit the carpet, and
Well, I was wondering two things. What the person on the phone, I mean, that must stay with them forever. We'll come to that. But were you sat in your seat? Were you stood up? What happened? How long were you out for? Were the people around? Did somebody find you? Paint the picture.
Okay. So I was actually shadowing a colleague, and they were delivering some training, and I was shadowing them. So that we had just had a break. So in fact, all of the delegates, I think, had more or less, I think one delegate was talking to my colleague and the rest of them had gone for lunch. And that's when I got the phone call. And I was sort of at the back of the room. I was on the call having this conversation. And the next thing, I just remember my colleague saying, just lie still, fainted. And I obviously your mind goes blank. It's the first time I'd ever fainted in my life. So this was kind of a whole new experience. And I just remember there was this like stinging on my forehead. And I was like, I was more concerned about what was going on with my head, really. And then he was saying, I think you should just sort of, go to the restaurant and just sort of sit it out. And, I think, is there anybody who can come and pick you up? Luckily, we were delivering some training in the Midlands. So, and I was told that I couldn't drive because they weren't sure why I'd fainted. And they wasn't sure that, was it something to do with my heart or whatever? And I didn't know at the time either. So yeah, so he was there and he looked after me, and then I kind of just went and sat in the restaurant, and just to be completely honest, I sat in this restaurant and I was in floods of tears, as you can imagine. And it was just this kind of acknowledgement that, gosh, all this pressure had been building, and I had to sort of sit with it, really. But I remember I got this huge gash across the top of my forehead, and I couldn't even say to my parents what happened. So when they said to me, "So, well, what happened to your head?" I said, I tripped on the stairs going upstairs, and I hit my head on the staircase, because I couldn't bear the thought of them saying, "Told you shouldn't have moved, told you it wasn't the right job for you," all of those things. It was hilarious. Um, but yeah,
How
that
did
was.
you find out? How did you find out then? If you didn't know why you'd fainted, how did you find out it was because of that phone call and that information?
So after I was off work for about a week, and I was very fortunate because they said, you need to go and get yourself tested and make sure that your heart is okay and everything. Because one of the things that happened just while the only thing I can recall was that there was this huge kind of thumping in my chest before I passed out. And I think that's what they thought. They thought that maybe there's just something, just check yourself out, make sure there's nothing going on. But it became pretty obvious that, I, in my head, had just built this project up to be so big. And I think I was anticipating the worst. And then when the worst came, it kind of reaffirmed what I was thinking anyway. It was a real wake up call, to be honest. And I think, it makes me much more in tune with, when I sometimes coach managers and we talk about workload and we talk about, how we all have this sort of tolerance level. But there comes a point where we go over the edge. There's a tipping point, and that tipping point is going to be different for everybody, because, the level of pressure that we can deal with is going to be different for different people. But it's about, knowing, having some self-awareness around what is that, what is this load that I can carry and I'm still okay, but we all have a tipping point. And so it was obvious that I had reached my tipping point, but also at that time, I wasn't really doing the work around stress management and resilience and mindset. And I could, when I reflect back, I think, gosh, all of these things that I could have done, which would have prevented that happening. And, like you were saying, Lisa, that even now there are still lots of people who I talk to who are in, stressful jobs, and they're still not doing those things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an enormous amount of pressure we put on ourselves of holding up this identity and this image,
Mm,
asking a question how or what or more, can I have more information, will in some way affect how people perceive them.
yeah.
And with Dr. Darren Stevens in his conversation, it's fresh in my mind, which is why I'm raising it, why I'm mentioning it with you today. He was saying, your personality can change. You're not stuck with your personality. You're not obliged to have the same personality as you did 5 minutes ago. But I do feel that with our image, with our identity, we're pretty attached to it, to what we've created. And I remember when I first started working in hotels and I was 18 and I'd put on my application form, in 5 years' time, I want to do sales. And so I would constantly be walking around holding an image so it would be easy for people to see me in a sales position. It wasn't who I was then, in that moment, it wasn't who I was, but we call it in NLP that we now know, neuro-linguistic
Yeah.
programming. We have a term called act as if.
Yeah.
And so I would always be acting as if it's easy for my bosses to see me in the job that's above the one I'm in. But with that comes an image of looking like you can be trusted, that you know everything. But it's an incredible amount of stress and strain for anybody that's going through that now, of as you're forming your identity, as you're forming your image, your reputation, your credibility, that we become quite attached to giving the impression that we're already the finished article.
Yeah.
And then it really limits any flexibility around asking certain questions or being curious. It kind of locks us into a pretty stuck behavior state. I'm searching for the right words in this second. Can you see that in people today? And it's all coming from the very best place of, I want my boss, my company, my team to know they can 100% rely on me.
Yeah,
I'm here, I've
definitely.
got this.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? That as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, like, for example, I talk about resilience, I talk about stress, I talk about mindset. And so sometimes people assume that because I talk about these things, I'm resilient, like I never get stressed. And it's like, no, that is not the case at all. Like,
You're not immune.
exactly, I'm
You didn't
human.
read a book and it give you an immunity shot.
Exactly. Like I am human. And so I always say that if I am growing and evolving as a human, then I'm also going to be experiencing new things. And those new things, those new situations are going to bring uncertainty. They're going to bring unfamiliarity. They're going to take me outside my comfort zone, which means that I'm probably going to experience a different level of stress. Doesn't mean to say that I'm never going to get stressed again, but what it does mean is that I'm much more familiar with it and I recognize it. And because I recognize it and I'm more aware of it, and because I've done the work on myself, I see it for what it is. But it also means is that I then also can have access and dip into my toolkit of strategies and tools and go, okay, this is what I need right now. But I think that thing about your identity and people holding on to that identity. So, I'm a manager. I've got to be I've got to be seen by my team as knowing all the answers. Like, I can't say I don't know the answer to that question. That's one of the first things I say, that you've got to be able to say, that's a really great question. I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm going to go and find out.
Yeah. Or can
Even
we all explore it together?
or
Let's
explore it
bring
together.
it. Let's bring it to the next team meeting and
Yeah.
see. I've got
Yeah.
a solution in my mind, but I think collectively we can have a better one. That kind of expression.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
but what you're pointing out is you don't have to think you know everything.
Absolutely. And I think that's what happened when I fainted, because that was my belief back then. My belief was, I'm now appointed, into this position. Everybody else kind of appears, my perception, like they're all in the know, they know what they're doing, and I can't be seen to not know, because that shows a weakness. But that was me back then.
Absolutely. And from that, though, what a story. What a story, and what a liberation you must have had as a result of it. I think identity shows up a lot in career, don't you? I mean, what have you seen over the years as in HR and in people development and as a consultant and now with your mind at work business? What have you seen in terms of people's identity that has been so limiting for them that if they just relaxed with it and were more in flow with who they truly are inside, that they would benefit so much more?
Yeah, I think there is something, isn't there, about titles and positions and the perception that we have around those identities. So, just, the simple example of, I'm a manager, I'm managing a team, I have to be in control, I can't seem to be weak. I should know all the answers, I should be able to do all of these things. And so, with that, if you have that as your identity, it's just a recipe for disaster, isn't it? Because there's just no space there to breathe. There's like, where do you then go? There's nowhere for you to go, is there? And so when you hold on to those types of identities, I would say that there's probably, you got to do a bit of work with yourself, haven't you? Like, for example, just a simple example, like I come across a lot of managers and I say to them, how good are you at delegating? And they're like, well, I like to stay in control, or they're not going to do a good job at like I am, or what if they get it so wrong and then I'm the one who's going to be responsible? Even that little thing about not willing to, because not willing to delegate. It's about unpicking the reason why. And, because maybe the perception is that because I'm a manager, I should be able to do all of these things myself and more. So when you're so attached to your identity, it is important to sort of just take a bit of time out and just reflect that, what's really going on here for me.
Well,
Because,
and also, what is my identity?
yeah,
Put it on a piece of paper. What is it that that I hope I'm portraying? And what parts of that is leading to inflexibility or not allowing me to fail so I can learn, or not allowing others to fail so they can grow?
exactly. Exactly. And I guess I know we're using the word identity, but it's about connecting to your authentic self, isn't it? And it's recognizing that, because at the end of the day, they are labels, and if you remove the label of I'm a manager, or if I'm this, or if I'm that, then what are you left with?
Yeah. And also that giving yourself permission to be able to say, I'm in the growth season of my life. The next 20 years, I'm in growth. And so I'm not going to hold myself accountable to the yesterday version of me. And then I've just written down a word here, which is, I think, one of the most valuable insights anybody can have is into their own self-awareness.
Mm.
There's that version of who we really are. And then there's the version of who we want to be, and there's the version of what other people see, isn't there? Or there's at least that triangle. Do you know another model that people identify with about their self-awareness?
No, I'm not aware of a model as such, but just as you were talking, and I was thinking, when I was sort of growing up, there was some, like, the self-awareness that I had of, like, around my own identity. It was really shaped by my parents. It was shaped by my culture, by the religion, by their values.
Should. It was shaped by a should.
Should, yeah, this is what you should be doing. This is, who you are. And I was told, what kind of person I should be,
You were
you know?
should shaped.
Yeah, right. And then it was like, I knew that that wasn't me. And I was then trying to discover who Daksha was. But even then, it was very much influenced by external definitions of what success looks like. So you have a good career, you drive a nice car, you have your own house, you look a certain way, you wear certain clothes, whatever it was. And I remember going through my life quite, thinking, oh, I want the big house and I want the fancy car and all of these things, and I want this much salary and this much income and all of those things. But again, they're all things that are then dictated by what society thinks success is. And I guess I'm now kind of at that stage. So, one of the things, I don't know if I shared this with you previously, Lisa, but, just as I decided to go become self-employed, my parents became quite ill. And so literally I became a carer as well. And so for 10 years, I was sort of caring for elderly parents with my brothers. And your whole identity went. My whole identity went. It was like I was a carer. I wasn't a daughter anymore. It was like, just doing things, making sure that they were okay, trying to have a relationship, trying to sort of build a business, trying to live your life, all of these things you're juggling. And it's quite interesting because once my mum passed away in November 2019, and then my father passed away in January 21. And it was like, I don't know who I am anymore, because most of my life had been absorbed by everything that I was doing. And I really felt this disconnect, like, I don't know what Daksha wants anymore in life. I don't know what I'm about. I don't know, who is she, because a lot of who I was, my whole identity was wrapped around with my parents, what I did for them, where I came from, the culture, all of those things. And I think it's quite interesting because I'm still on this journey where I am still uncovering who Daksha is.
How did it begin? What enabled you to start answering that question? Because I'm a massive believer in our imagination reveals parts. Once we've accepted that part or understood it, then we get the next part and the next part. So when you say I'm still revealing who Daksha is, I'm not surprised, because I feel like it's been revealed to you in stages that you'll accept it rather than resist it. But how did you begin the revelation of this gorgeous creature? So I just want to say, first of all, your self-esteem is in great shape, because not one part of you resisted that compliment. This gorgeous creature, you went, yeah, right.
But I've had to work on that.
Yeah.
I have had to work on that many, many years ago. I'd have been going, no, 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 that's not
Yeah.
me. But no, that's another area that I've done a lot of work on.
Yeah.
So thank you for acknowledging that.
It's obvious. Yeah. So what began the revelation?
I think what began the revelation was once both my parents passed away, a lot of my time had been dedicated and absorbed by looking after them. So then it was like, okay, I don't have to go to Birmingham this weekend. I can do whatever I want,
What is that? Yeah. What
And
do I
what
want?
is that? So I lived in Nottingham for over 20 years, and I often say that although I lived in Nottingham, I never really had a life in Nottingham, because most of, especially the sort of the latter 10 years, it was literally every weekend I was like going back to Birmingham. During the week I was working, and it was time was like so precious, and it was every single minute was kind of used up by something. And then when I no longer had to go home at weekends, it wasn't like I had like this circle of friends in Nottingham where I could just go, okay, right, I'm coming out with you tonight. There was nothing.
It was a blank canvas for
It was a
you.
blank canvas, yeah. And I think it was that was probably having a bit of time and a bit of space to just go, okay, so my time is my own now. What is it that Daksha wants to do? And it wasn't easy. And even now, after sort of 4 years of both not going home at weekends, when the weekend arrives, there's still this feeling of, the weekend's mine. I can do whatever I want. I don't have to be anywhere. I don't have to cook. I don't have to clean. Don't have to do any shopping. Don't have to do this. It was like, even now, there's this, I don't know whether it's just this enormous amount of gratitude for the fact that, my time is now my own. But I think when you have responsibilities, when, you've got to look after other people, or if you've got children, you've got to take them here, you've got to take them there, you don't have that luxury.
Mm.
And I think that maybe that's probably where it starts, that, if you can just carve out a bit of time for yourself and ask yourself, okay, so, what do I want to do? Who do I want to be? And I think it's those moments that, start to you go inward and you start to connect to you. So, when I was saying to you about how when I was younger I used to really enjoy art, and since moving to Scotland, like, there's this weekly local group where that they're all retired, and we just all get together and we just sit and we just paint, but it's once a week.
Nice.
And it's like, okay, so that's Daksha reconnecting back to what kind of makes me feel grounded. I really enjoy it. It mentally, it kind of gives me a bit of space. It's something completely different. You do it on your own. You literally zone out for a couple of hours and then you kind of zone back into the world. So it is about,
Well, I feel like actually you zone in for a couple of
yes,
hours and then you
and you
zone
zone
out.
back out the other way
Yeah,
around.
because I loved what you said as so then I went inward to see what Daksha wanted. And I think that's the key thing is we should go inward. What do I want? What feels good for me? What have I had a seed of that I've not created space to see what it is, rather than what's happening out there that I feel like I'd want to do or copy or somebody else is doing, so I feel like I should be doing it. So that's just such a gem. You went inward. What does Daksha want?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's really interesting because for a long time, and even now, every now and again, I forget, like, I'm my own person. I can do whatever I want, because that childhood had a big impact on me, still has a big impact on me. And I think a lot of what I'm doing now is unlearning and relearning.
Yeah, I feel like you are almost having a rebirth.
Yeah.
It's yeah, rebirth, and you're still exploring. You're not like, oh yeah, I've set up my own business and know exactly what I'm doing, exactly where I'm going. You're still wearing, I like doing that, I like doing that, I'll do more of that. You're still in that space of I can do what I like when I like.
Yes.
And I'm going to try all the ice creams, or I'm going to try these ice creams and be more in that. And I think that's how else can we know what we really like doing? We can't decide we really like doing something until we've done it and expressed it. And I feel like you are properly experiencing and tasting your experiences so that you can be true to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of I do feel like I'm sort of a bit of a late starter, like I'm a sort of a late starter, like, to the, in life. I feel like I'm catching up a little bit. But I think it comes back to, what you were saying about, I'm a big believer that you can't change the past. And I don't think that it's about regretting anything, because, like you were saying, every single experience you have, you've no idea how it connects to something else. There's a brilliant movie, isn't there, called Sliding Doors. And, I always think about that sliding doors, that you're exactly where you're meant to be.
Yeah, I love that. I think that the Buddhists say that you're always right where you're meant to be in any given moment.
Yeah.
And when I look back over my life, I think I can look at the dots and think, I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for that. And if that hadn't have happened, I wouldn't have done that. Like it all makes total sense. And that's why I don't regret anything in life. There's some things that look like really, like I fell off a table dancing and broke my leg
Wow.
at a senior managers conference. Yeah, I had the most massive shame and guilt about it. But then I got employed by a company that gave me share options. And
Because
then I
they love
worked
what
about,
you've done.
yeah, because they thought we need a girl with, and the managing director was Irish, so he loved a good time. I never ever got on another table again. But when I look at that, there was like so much shame I had attached to it. But it meant that I had an interview lined up with this next company, and I did the interviewing on. I had to ring him from my hospital bed and say I can't make it can't make the interview. I fell off the table last night at the big rebranding conference. But then that led to me feeling like I want a new beginning. And I went and worked for this gorgeous hotel group. I wasn't sacked from the old one. I did have to resign. And when I worked for this gorgeous hotel group where I had share options, and when we refinanced 4 years later, I then invested my share options in training to do what I do now.
Amazing.
So the thing that looked like the most shameful part of my career was actually a catalyst for me, because I wouldn't have looked twice at this other company, because I thought, well, I sell 115 hotels right now. Why do I want to go and sell 16? But there were 16 4 and 5-star hotels, and it was working for venture capitalists. So it was very fast paced. It was very hardcore, but it was right up my street. And so when I look back, even the things that I regret, not regret, even if the things that I think that I would look back and regret, I see without that happening, I wouldn't be where I am now. And I think it's a great exercise for people to do, is to join the dots. And so I see with you, whilst you say you feel like you're a slow starter, actually you have gathered so much material, so much evidence. You might be new into being self-employed, but you're not new into your expertise.
No, no. And it's interesting because people often say to me, why did you get into resilience? And it's really interesting because I think to myself, like, for my parents to come to the UK, it took a lot of resilience.
Massive.
Huge,
And drive.
Yeah. And so, I always think to myself that I never think that I was a resilient. I never used to think, oh gosh, I must be really resilient. But when I look back, I think, I am resilient in a lot of areas. I'm resilient, but there's always other things that test your resilience. That's not a bad thing. It's because, like I said to you, that if I'm not being tested, then I'm not evolving. I'm not growing. Like, I always want to feel that discomfort, because if I'm not feeling it, then I'm not probably pushing myself as much.
Conscious.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and I think also, just talking like you talking about dancing on the table and falling off, and I'm thinking that it's not, I never used to share my story about me passing out, because again, I was really embarrassed. I was ashamed. I was like, I didn't want anybody to know that had happened. But now I'm more than happy to share it, because I've been able to look at that time in my life and take the wisdom from it, and think, you know what, actually, if that hadn't happened, then the next thing wouldn't have happened, then the next thing wouldn't have happened. And,
Absolutely.
I just really feel like all of these things, and you might not think it at the time, you might think, oh, how could this have happened to me? This is really bad. And you don't see that seed of opportunity or positivity. But I think it always becomes so much more apparent sort of later on, when you can go back and you can revisit that experience and not have the emotional charge. And that's when you know that you've learned from it, because that's wisdom, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a saying, you know that you've healed something when you can look back and say, I'm glad that happened.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great way of looking at it. Yeah.
Daksha, thank you so much for your time, your story, your wisdom, your heart today. I have loved this conversation. I hope that everybody's loved listening to it and watching it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Lisa, for the opportunity to talk about it. I love talking to you, and it's been great, because I think when you have these conversations, you forget. And, today, just talking to you was a great reminder of how far I personally have come.
Yeah.
And I think there's so many stories, isn't there? We haven't got time to share them all, but, I think you forget how far you've come. And it is important, isn't it? I would say to all your listeners,
Mm.
the version of you today is so different to that version of you in the past. And
I wasn't created overnight.
and wasn't created overnight, but just take some time to just celebrate who you've become,
And how far you've come,
how
and
far
what
you've
you've
come,
overcome.
what you've overcome.
Yeah.
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 And what you're going to achieve, just imagine what you're going to achieve in the future.
Yeah, I love that. Oh, thank you so much,
Well,
lovely.
thank you.